Welcome to the Have Courage Summit, a summit dedicated to helping you get out of your own way and to help unleash the potential of the inner you. Today, I'm very grateful to welcome Roz Savage onto the summit. So Roz is an incredible human being, someone that started work as a management consultant, but then got bored of that and decided to challenge a number of the world's oceans for some bizarre reason, which we'll learn more about. So from 2005, she challenged the Indian, Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, rowing across all of those solo, which is absolutely incredible feat. And I'm so grateful to welcome Roz onto the show. Hi there, Roz.
It's my real pleasure, Gary. Wonderful to be here with you.
Lovely. Well, I do really appreciate you joining me. So as we get going, I'm giving a brief introduction to you. Do you mind maybe just expanding on that a little bit? What was that tipping point that took you from management consultancy to challenging some of the world's biggest oceans?
Well, I'd like to emphasize I am not one of those people. Like, if your listeners are thinking that, because I used to have this certain preconception about people who climbed mountains or sailed or rowed across oceans or trekked to poles. I thought they had been born that way, that they just had that adventure gene and that I could never be like that. And if you'd have met me 20 years ago, back during the dying days of my corporate career, you would never have guessed that I would end up rowing alone across 3 oceans, because that was certainly not on the cards at that time. And really a pivotal moment for me was when I had realised that even though I didn't yet know what I wanted to do when I grew up, and this in my early 30s, I had firmly decided that management consultancy was not it, and that I really needed to find something that felt more purposeful, more contributing to the greater good. And so I was actually in a very bad place at that time. My self-esteem was going totally down the pan. I know now it's because I just didn't care about the work I was doing. It didn't resonate with my values at all. But at the time I thought, what's wrong with me? Why am I not doing better? And also, why am I really hating this job when everybody around me seems fine? So I turned to self-help books, and especially that classic, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the second habit is to begin with the end in mind. And he suggests an exercise to begin with the ultimate end in mind, which is to imagine your own funeral. Wow. Which sounds a bit morbid, but actually, I think it's really only when we become aware that we have a finite amount of time on this planet that we actually crack on and realise that we need to do things before it's too late. So this exercise required you to imagine your own funeral and write 2 versions of what people would be saying about you. The version that you want and the version that you're heading for if you carry on as you are. And I remember looking at these 2 versions and just thinking, oh my word, I'm heading in completely the wrong direction for the kind of legacy that I want to leave, the way that I want to be remembered. And there was something else really dramatic that happened when I did that exercise. When I was writing the fantasy one, not the business as usual one, when I wrote the fantasy one and I was describing this courageous person who just got out there and lived the heck out of life, and who tried to make the world a better place, and who was remembered for being a brave and good friend. When I was writing that, it was as if I'd opened a door into a parallel universe where I was actually living the life that I was meant to be living. Even though it was dramatically different from the life I was actually living at that time, it felt real. And I think from that moment on, that vision of my future wanted to become true. So this will sort of resonate, given that we're talking about courage today. When I did that exercise, I wish I could tell you that I went into the office the next day and quit my job and strode out to row purposefully across oceans, but I didn't, because I was scared, because I realised that the fantasy version was going to require me to give up all sorts of things that to me represented security. Certainly the job, and hence the steady income, but probably also my significant relationship. I just couldn't see how I could live that life and stay with the man that I was with. So it was a terrifying prospect. I just couldn't see how that fantasy version could possibly come true. So I shoved it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But I do think that on some deep, probably subconscious level, I'd connected with something. I'd connected with a very different story about who I could be. And that story wanted to come true. And over the next few years, the things that had represented security, but in fact were also holding me in my old life, one by one, those fell away. And I found myself probably looked like a complete train wreck because, I was jobless, incomeless, single, homeless. But actually, it was incredibly liberating. I'd done that really scary thing, like to quit the job, to leave the partner. That was really, really, really hard. But I learned something really important about courage then, that when you've got a really strong reason for doing something, and you can feel the fear and do the thing anyway, in order to connect with your sort of authentic life. It's scary before you've made the decision, but after you've made the decision, you look back and you think, this is brilliant. Like, out here is where all the cool stuff is happening. And why didn't I make that decision sooner? So I guess I was lucky in that I didn't have children dependent on me. But I think even people with children, we often make excuses not to live the life that we're meant to be living. But actually, I couldn't go back now. I couldn't go back into that gilded cage that I lived in for so long. So if anybody out there listening to this is right on the edge of taking a big brave step and you're nervous about it, then take it from me that out there is where the cool stuff is happening. So take the leap and commit to making it happen. And there will be wobbles. I know I had a lot of wobbles. And especially lack of money can undermine resolve. But you figure out a way to make it work. That was a very, very long answer to your question.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. It's a brilliant. What's wonderful though is that will resonate. It resonates with me. It's almost like you're giving me a live coaching session right now, to be honest, Roz, because it's fear. For me, it's a lot around fear, isn't it? It's what we tell ourselves in the moment about situations. How did you get past your own fears? Each step of that journey, step by step, leaving the job. Okay, you weren't with the right person that was going to serve that end for you. Was there a conscious sort of process you were going through? Was it very much in the moment, following your gut almost to some extent?
Certainly the hardest thing that I've ever done was leaving that relationship. There was so much emotional investment in it and so much validation, I think, because like I say, my self-esteem was in a very bad place at that time. But I remember waking up literally the morning after that decision and sort of, you can picture like one eye opens and I look around and I go, oh my God, I survived. Like I did the scary thing and looks like the sun still rose and the world's still turning. And really that was one of the biggest turning points in my life, to realize that I could do a terrifying thing and live to tell the tale. And I think, that was quite a dramatic one, but I think as soon as we start taking steps outside of our comfort zone, we start to rewrite the story of who we are. So I know before that, my story was, I'm scared, I'm timid, I have crappy self-esteem. I was so aware of all the things that I couldn't do rather than things that I could. I had a very, very poor story about myself. And to have actually taken a bold step after a huge amount of deliberation and commit to making it work out, that really set me onto a very different track. I started to go, I can do brave things. I could be terrified, but do it anyway. And I really think that, so I've thought a lot about courage. I actually taught a class on it at Yale last year. Oh, now 2 years ago. I firmly believe this, like the 10-second version of a one semester course, that when your motivation is bigger than your fear, then you're able to feel the fear, but do the thing anyway. And I was in such a miserable state in my old life. I knew something had to change. So even if the change I was making turned out to be, quotes, the wrong one, which I don't really believe in right and wrong. I just think everything turns out in the end. And if it hasn't turned out, it's not the end yet, which sounds a bit glib. But I think with that attitude, you just commit to making it work out. That when you pump up the motivation, and for me, that doing that vision of my own funeral, that gave me the motivation. I was like, I want to be that person. And that was the positive vision that I was moving towards. And I guess that's another part of it, to have that positive vision of who you want to be and how that's going to feel and how people are going to react to you and how it's going to feel on the inside, to have that confidence. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to look back at the me of 20 years ago, because I can look back now and go, wow, I have really changed. Certainly takes a lot more to scare me now. And on the inside, that just feels so much better. So that was a very long way of saying that the people that we look up to, whether they're adventurers or businessmen or, I was going to say politicians, but I'm not really sure we look up to them quite so much anymore. Whoever we admire, they are not that different from us. Mm. I really fundamentally believe that any of us can become the sort of person that we admire. And it's just about this beautiful quote, surprise yourself every day with your own courage. Just do a little something every day, or occasionally a big something, a big terrifying something that takes you outside your comfort zone. And over the course of doing that consistently over a lifetime or over many years, you end up in a very, very different place than you would do otherwise. Really, those people are just like us. They feel the fear as well.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that, because before we came on to record this discussion, for anyone that's watching this, I did my God, you've rowed across 3 oceans across the world. Who am I to talk to you? But it's amazing what we tell ourselves. And I think what this summit is all about is how do we actually help people realize that those are just thoughts, and that, yes, they can be very powerful, they can be very compelling, they can feel very real, but at the end of the day, they are just thoughts, and they can go in the moment like everything else. And I just love your story of how I'd like to come back to that. So going from that sort of journey, I can see where you've been, where you've come to today. How the heck did you start rowing boats across the ocean? where was the link? You've done this, I can imagine you've done this obituary. Was rowing across the ocean part of that obituary?
No, in fact, the obituary was really, it wasn't very specific. It was much more about how it would feel to be me and how people would have felt by being around me. Like, what was it that I would bring to them? Would I be a good friend? Would I be of service in the world? So no, it certainly didn't mention ocean rowing. Nothing could have been further from my mind at that time. But after I started making these changes, I went on a trip to Peru for 3.5 months, which was another big leap into the unknown for me, with a 2-week crash course in Spanish. And that led to an environmental awakening. And this really comes back to my point about having a big motivation, because when I finally sort of got with the program on what was happening with the environment, with climate change, with habitat destruction, with oceans, I was on fire with passion. I just absolutely had to do something to raise awareness of our issues and hopefully inspire some action, so we can get ourselves onto a more sustainable path. But I had absolutely no idea how to do that. I'm just a failed management consultant. I had no platform, no voice really. And through a lovely series of serendipities and synchronistic meetings, and me constantly holding this question of what can I do for this environmental purpose? After several months of frustration going, I just don't know how I could be useful. One day I was just driving along my car and this crazy, crazy idea popped into my head. I should say I had rowed at university, Not that that helps in rowing across an ocean. It's a very different thing, rowing with 8 other people on a nice flat river, to bouncing your way across an ocean on your own. So I had rowed then. I was also aware that there was this very obscure activity of some nutters, like rowing alone or in crews across oceans. So it wasn't completely a bolt from the blue, but I just hadn't put all of the pieces together until this one day when I was on a long drive, and this completely bonkers idea popped into my head that, hey Roz, well, you know how to row. How hard can it be to row across an ocean and use that as your platform through blogs and talks and books to raise environmental awareness? So it really did pop into my head almost fully formed. And my first thought was, that's brilliant. And then my second thought was, oh my God, that's the worst idea I ever had in my whole life. Because it was so far removed from anything I'd ever done before. I'd once been sailing for about 5 days and hadn't particularly enjoyed it. So I don't know if you ever have this feeling, like in your heart, you know something is right, but your brain is thinking of the 1,001 reasons why it's a really terrible idea. Absolutely. You're going to fail, everybody's going to laugh at you, you'll be embarrassed. That's the brain's job, unfortunately, is to keep us safe. The brain doesn't really like change. And so it doesn't like us stepping outside our comfort zones. And I wish I'd known more about this bit of neuroscience at the time, because now when my brain's freaking out going, no, don't even think about doing that, I'm like, yes, brain, I understand you're doing the job, thank you, but I'm actually going to do this, and then I'm going to need your help, brain, to help me with the execution of it. So, you know, that's when we'll allow, you know, the fear voice to say, oh, what about this, and what about that, and we'll go, yes, we're going to plan for that. So basically what I'm saying is, for a week, my heart and my head did battle. The heart was yes, the brain was no. And eventually the heart persuaded the brain that actually we were going to do this. And so the brain went, okay, well, if we were going to do this, then what would we need to do? Who would we talk to? What books would we read? What courses would we take? What we need to buy? So how much money would we need? And I just made this massive list in an Excel spreadsheet and looked down it and went, I reckon I could do that. And, you know, when you break it down, the big scary thing, into lots of little things, it really gets a lot less scary and starts to seem doable, which is not to say that there weren't countless moments of terror, both in the preparation, that was mostly financial terror, and then once I got out onto the ocean. It was scary, but I just really, really committed to making this happen. So I was all in.
I love it. What's really interesting, though, before you just described how important the environmental aspect was to you getting across the ocean, that wasn't always clear to me. So what I'm sensing or hearing, but please correct me, is actually that drive for you to get on the ocean was very much that purpose. How can I raise awareness? How can I help make a difference to our environmental cause? Was your sort of trigger to getting on the ocean, rather than the ocean itself being something you felt you had to cross. Is that right? Or...
Yeah, that is right. Yeah, it wasn't about the rowing, really. Okay. The rowing was, yeah, because I'm, like, between me and you, I don't particularly like physical exercise.
Me, you, hopefully 100,000 people.
Well, exactly. So rowing for 12 hours a day for like 100 or so days on end was certainly not my idea of fun. But it had, so as heart and brain were having this debate, it sort of became clear that, unsurprisingly, not that many people row across ocean, so it was unusual enough to get people's attention for them to go, she's doing what? And then thanks to the wonderful new technologies of satellite phones and websites and blogs, I was going to be able to write on a daily basis to get my environmental message across. I would say, in all honesty, it was probably 50-50 between the environmental mission and the personal mission to find out what I was capable of. Like, who am I? I'd been reading, excuse me, some very inspiring books by people like Henry David Thoreau at Walden Pond, and a book called A Cave in the Snow about a woman who became a Buddhist nun and spent 7 years in a cave above the snow line in Tibet. So there was definitely an attraction towards those solitary spiritual adventures at that time. And I think I'd fondly imagined, thank God I didn't know what was actually going to happen, I'd fondly imagined that because I was out there as like a champion for Mother Nature, that Mother Nature was going to go, thank you, Roz, I shall send you fair winds and following seas, and you will have a beautiful, serene, spiritual experience out there. And of course, it was not like that at all. The Atlantic was my first ocean, and it was the roughest year like ever since records began on the Atlantic. And I had a terrible time. Everything broke. I got injured. It was utterly miserable. Every single day, I wondered what the hell I was doing out there, and wondered why this had ever seemed like a good idea. But it's probably just as well for me that logistically it's very hard to quit from the middle of an ocean. Like, you can't catch the bus home. You know, you've really just got to hang on in there and somehow get to the other side without driving yourself insane.
It's really fascinating. I love that, though, because, as you say, there's equally this part around being purpose-driven, but also wanting to stretch yourself as a human being. And when those two things come in alignment, that almost gave you this courage, you know, because you knew what you wanted to be, and you knew how to try and get there. And that was almost like, it seems like the jet propellant to really push you on that journey. It's really powerful, Roz.
Yeah, I do think certainly it works for me to have that combination of like the inner purpose and the outer purpose. So my inner one was, who am I? What's my limits? And just for the record, my limits are a lot broader than I thought they were. Before I set out on that first stage, I kept thinking I was hitting my limit, and I didn't. So there was that inner part, and then there was also that outer part of doing something, trying to be of service in the world, without wanting to sound too sort of smug and pious about it. But for me, having that inner and that outer purpose, there were days when if it had been all about me, I'd have been like, oh, like, I'm over it, like, call for help. And there were other days when I'd been like, sorry, environment, but like, I'm just done with this. You're on your own now. So I think it really, the more reasons why you have to do what you do, the stronger your commitment is, the stronger your motivation is, and the more able you are to overcome the fears. And I've learned a lot about fear. I really have. I was absolutely terrified on that crossing. The first 2 weeks were the worst. Or even the first night, I was feeling really seasick. And the boat was tipping around like mad in these big waves, and could hear the waves crashing around the cabin. And I just remember curling up in my bunk, trying to get some sleep in the pitch dark, and thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I've told everybody I'm going to do this. I've really cut off all my paths of retreat. I've got to walk the talk now, or row the talk. That doesn't rhyme quite so well. So it was hard, but you know, that's how we get stronger, isn't it? Is doing the hard stuff. You don't find your courage by sitting on the sofa eating cookies, do you? You've got to get out there and do something scary.
If only. But can I come back to that previous point? You mentioned previously, which was really, really interesting. You said that you pushed your limits and then you seemed to push them again. Do you mind speaking about that a bit more? What was going on there for you?
Well, in a way, it's the ocean that was pushing my limits. I had, I won't say unwittingly, because clearly I'd chosen to row across an ocean. I just had no idea how hard it was going to be. And there were so many times that I kept thinking, I'm about to hit my limit of pain, of frustration, of terror, of boredom. I would just be like, I can't stand this. Like I was really going to explode with it all. And then 10 minutes later, I'd still be sitting there and I hadn't exploded, and I was still rowing. And I would go, oh, I guess that wasn't where my limit was then. I actually can stand this for a moment longer. And so I just carried on doing that. And
wow.
it certainly didn't get easier as the voyage went on. In a way, it was almost like life was going, aha, you think you're getting the hang of this now? Well, I'm just going to push you a little bit harder. And in fact, when the satellite phone broke 24 days before the end of the voyage, so that I had no communications from that point on, I realised how strong that cord to land had, that sort of metaphorical umbilical cord to land had been. And now, you know, I couldn't speak to my mum, I couldn't speak to my weatherman, I couldn't speak to anybody. It was like, well, I guess I wanted to find out how self-reliant I could be. I got what I asked for. And it was like the perfect challenge. It was almost like this calibrated assault course that life had set out for me, that just I thought I was getting the hang of it, it would throw a new challenge at me. It never got to be too much, but looking back through my logbooks, afterwards I was thinking, wow, it really was just one thing after another. It never let me really relax into it. It was definitely the steepest learning curve that I've ever had in my life. And it actually, by the time I finished the voyage, I knew something really special had happened. I knew that I was fundamentally altered in a good way by the experience. And I was actually, then my fear was that I would lose that new me, that she would just stay out on the ocean. And that once I got back onto dry land and amongst all the old temptations, I would just sort of lapse back into who I'd been before. You know, like it's easy to lose weight when you're on a spa retreat and there's no naughty food or alcohol around. But then at some point you have to come back to reality and keep your new resolutions. So I actually very conscientiously did the work when I got back to dry land to sit down and write and journal. I'm a real believer in journaling, and analyse what had I learned out there and to weave those lessons into who I am in the way that I show up every day, so that it didn't just become, okay, tick that box, I've crossed that ocean. But I really wanted to carry those changes forward for them to become part of who I am every single day. And yeah, I'm proud of that. Change is difficult, and but I know it's possible because I've changed in so many ways. And I don't know, again, going back to the me of 20 years ago, I suppose there are probably two things I would say. Sorry, I'm sort of interviewing myself here.
My next question, Roz, was going to be, what were your two biggest learning takeaways? So you're all over it. Don't worry. You're all over it.
Excellent question. First of all, I would say don't worry so much about what other people think, because most people are too busy thinking about themselves to be thinking about you. And I know I certainly used to care far too much about it. And, actually there are more than two things. But another one would be, don't worry too much about failure. It's a cliche, but the biggest failure is not to try. And it's only through getting out there and trying, with that comes the risk of failure, that you really learn what you're capable of. Like my next attempt on an ocean ended in abject failure. My first attempt on the Pacific, I got 10 days out, ran into a big storm. The boat was capsizing more than it should have been. I didn't call for rescue, but somebody who had best remain nameless, who I, right on the periphery of my circle, came over all heroic and decided he was going to call out the US Coast Guard to come and pick me up, much against my wishes. So I did end up being rescued, ended up in the back of a Coast Guard helicopter, being brought back to dry land, minus boat. And it was awful. It was really, I felt humiliated. The internet trolls came out in force, calling me all sorts of offensive things, saying I clearly had a death wish and I was a stupid female dog, and, you know, just lots of really... And what I learned from that is... So that might seem like I'm contradicting what I just said about most people don't care about our failures. But even if they do decide to criticize us, my theory on this is because it makes them feel better for being too cowardly to ever even try. They feel justified for not having tried because it all went pear-shaped for someone who got off their backside and went out there to do something. So there are certainly worse things in life than failure, or as I prefer to call them, major learning experiences.
That's brilliant. And you know something, it's been one of my things the last couple of years, 100% that, and I fully support your second point there. You know, it's far easier to play safe, and I've learned a lot the last 12 months around, it's far easier to play small than it is to put your head up that, step out over that precipice and be the one that's trying to make a difference. And I think, you know, massive respect to you, Roz. Obviously, it's just amazing listening to you talk about it. It's really, really fascinating.
Well, I think the world needs all of us, which is why I love that you're doing this summit, because we all have something unique to bring in the world. And okay, I chose to do something deliberately very attention-getting because that was my environmental mission. I'm actually quite an introvert. Well, I suppose that's obvious given I spend huge periods of time alone at sea. But my point is, when we look around, there are such massive global challenges, and I really believe that we need all hands on deck. We need everybody to find their unique gift, their purpose, their inner leader, and to make a contribution, especially looking at sustainability, but also like politically and economically and every which way. There's so much that needs doing in the world. And I know that we all have the capacity to do something worthwhile if we can find the courage to do it, which I think your summit is so well timed, and this message is vital.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think one of my biggest learnings the last 18 months, I would say, is around inclusion, and not inclusion just in terms of sort of race and background, but disability, just truly seeing every human being, as you said, having a unique opportunity to give something. And I'm really feeling that tide is turning. Sorry for the pun. I thought I'd throw it in there. The tide is definitely turning. But it feels to me, though, I don't know about you, Roz, it feels to me that there is this reconnection that's starting to happen en masse. But a lot of people are afraid to sort of, there's a lot of waiting, but I do think we're coming back. I feel like humanity's reconnecting. I just do. I'm an optimist, but I just do.
And it is that reconnection. It's reconnecting into communities. It's sort of reconnecting with our own self and our own dignity. It's reconnecting with the earth. And I'm sensing it too. And I keep asking people about this because I wonder if it's just that now the friends that I mix with are with the program on that. So I keep asking people, like, are you sensing something happening, something shifting, something changing? And everybody that I ask is like, yeah, we're getting there. And I think, you know, when you think the bell curve of like adoption of anything, whether it's an idea or a new technology or a new social media platform, the sort of the early adopters, and we've definitely had those visionaries way out there for several decades now. And I think we're really reaching that sort of crucial gap that comes at about sort of 11 to 13% adoption, I think it is, before like it really reaches the
early majority, isn't it? I think they call it the early majority. I think it is. Yeah.
Yes. So I think, well, my God, I mean, we need it. But yeah, I think we live in exciting times, and there's a lot of potential. Yeah. Like at the moment, it looks like we've got this almost unbridgeable gap between where we are and where we need to be. Certainly when we look at the environment. But we tend to assume that change is incremental. But I really believe that change can be quite radical and quite sudden. Like things can shift quite quickly. You look at, well, sometimes, like, after decades of trying, it becomes an overnight success. You know, abolishing slavery or any of the really big cultural shifts that have happened in the world probably did take quite a long time, but then the actual final snowballing happened quite quickly. So I agree with you. I do think, to mix our metaphors here, the tide is turning.
Oh, it's wonderful. So what are you working on right now? So you're busy. Are you still out speaking with people? Are you sort of leading sort of courses or other things? What's your
I do a lot of speaking, both corporate and non-profit. That is very enjoyable and pays the bills, so that's great. And I'm also creating a global network of women called the Sisters, because, no offense to men at all, we need balance between masculine and feminine in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And for too long, it's been too masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at our political systems, our economic systems, and they're still very much a masculine man's world. And looking at what we need more of in the future, I think we need more of the qualities that have traditionally been identified as feminine, although obviously men can embody them as well. Things like collaboration, nurturing, sharing, a more egalitarian approach, a more holistic approach rather than the sort of, so I would say partnership rather than domination. Because in the past we've seen a lot of humans dominating over nature, men over women, global north over global south, strong people over weaker people, and in a way coming back to what we were saying earlier about inclusion, like we all need to work together.
Yeah.
In equality and in partnership. So that's what the Sisters is all about. It's about bringing women together to do deep dives on the big questions facing the world today, to envision a better future and to spark ideas for real world projects that will actually make that vision real. And I'm having fun designing a complementary currency called the yin, as in yin and yang, to encourage and reward those good, healthy feminine behaviours that we want to see more of. So I'm sorry, but at the moment, guys can't join. Sorry about that. But I hope that in the future, once, as a sisterhood, once we've sort of found our voices, which I think is best done sort of in a single sex space, then I trust that at some point in the future we'll welcome in the brothers as well.
Well, I as a man fully support what you're doing, because to be honest, there's a lot of conversations around language. One for me, soft skills, for example, is another example of the complete wrong terminology for what is critical skills for the current and future of work.
I was holding my breath for a moment there, but yes, you're exactly
Crazy.
right. They're actually vital skills.
Yeah. And my favourite one on this one, Roz, I've heard recently, is catalyst skills, because they actually have the ability to transform the state of someone from something rather small to something massive and influential and transformational. So that term's the one I'm really enjoying at the moment, to be honest.
I like that. I'll throw another one into the mix, which is social alchemy, which is like this sort of, it's that rapid transformation that you and I both believe is underway in the world at the moment.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it's so wonderful to connect with you and to meet a kindred spirit who is also playing your part to make the world a better, more peaceful place. Absolutely. A more courageous place.
Well, thank you for joining me to have this conversation, Roz. How can people reach you if they wanted to reach out to you directly and have a conversation or find out more about your work?
Well, that'd be great. So I'll give the Sisters website. It's thesisters.global. And my personal website, where I blog every week on these sort of big questions. I tackled democracy last week. Upcoming, we have capitalism. And, you know, I like those like little trivial topics. My personal website is at rozsavage.com. That's Roz with a Z. And both of those have newsletters that you can sign up for so that you can get the latest updates direct to your inbox.
That's wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much for sparing the time today and for all the work you do, Roz. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Keep in touch. Cheers.